Welcome to the Be Here Now Guest Podcast. This series features a collection of teachings and conversations centered around mindfulness, spiritual growth, and living a life in balance. Each week, our diverse network of guest teachers and hosts offer up wisdom and practices from a different spiritual path and perspective. If you would like to support this podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/donate.
So this is a special gathering that we do once a month, and we call it the Explorers Club. And it really started because we wanted to have and create like a space to talk about this intersection of psychedelics, spirituality, science, and creativity. Ram Dass was really clear that moving forward after his passing, he wanted us to continue to meet. He wanted us to really look at science and spirituality. And we have this whole psychedelic renaissance going on that you all know about. And it feels really important that there's a community space and that there's a place to talk about the things we might not talk about with other people. And so we have this like interesting format, which is a little different than some of our other satsangs, if you've been to those, where we combine getting to hear from great wisdom keepers and people really on the forefront of this renaissance, and then also creating a space where we can learn from each other and connect with each other and share some of our stories. I said this in other places, but I really love it, so I share it often. This idea of what makes a healthy community. And it's this idea that we share a little of our stories. We hear a little bit of someone else's stories. We sing and we dance together. And so tonight we'll do a little bit of sharing of stories. And we're so lucky that tonight we also get to talk about music and the creation and creativity aspect of psychedelics and non-ordinary states. And we know that Ram Dass started his awakening through this psychedelic journey, and then he needed more. And so he went to the East and he found all these other technologies to really help integrate the things that he had glimpsed in his psychedelic experience. And he spent the last many decades of his life integrating. And so it doesn't matter how we get to non-ordinary states, whether it's through psychedelics or meditation, or there's the great Ram Dass story where it's the woman with the pillbox hat and the patent leather shoes, nodding in agreement as he talks about LSD. And he's like, how? Everyone, all the hippies, how does she know what I'm talking about? He asks her at the end and she's like, I crochet. And so we get there in so many different ways. But the purpose is to really have a space where we can talk about those states and investigate. And so that's what we're up to tonight. The first 75 minutes will be sort of conversation, and then we'll move into Q&A from you all. So you will be welcome at any point to raise your virtual hand and we'll call on you. Or if you have questions at any time, you can say hi in the chat. And in fact, if you haven't started to connect with each other in the chat, go ahead and you can maybe say a good word from your day or where you're coming from, or maybe a word or two about what brings you here. So I want to introduce the lovely people that are with us today. It's such an honor and privilege to be with them. Krishna Trevor Oswald, aka East Forest, and Marisa Radha Weppner. You probably know them already, but I'm going to introduce them anyway. East Forest, Krishna, has been this guiding light in the realm of music and psychedelics since 2008. Just incredible music. You might know his album collaboration with Ram Dass, which is really beautiful. He also does a lot of ceremony concerts. And he has this new feature-length film that's being released as we speak called Music for Mushrooms. And in it, he's exploring the intersection of music and transformative healing. And so really excited to hear more about that tonight. And then Radha brings this unique blend of Eastern spirituality and Western psychology to her work. She has a master's in transpersonal psychology and an extensive experience in yoga teaching and somatic experiencing. And she's been facilitating ketamine-assisted therapy since 2020. So bringing somatic awareness, mindfulness, therapeutic tools, and ritual for these journeys. And so it's such a gift to have both of them and their wisdom. So let's give them our lovely round of welcome with this is how you applause in sign language. So we'll say hey that way. And before we jump into hearing from them, I want to play this really lovely clip of Ram Dass, just so we can hear his voice in our gathering tonight. And I'm lost the share screen. There it is. Okay. All right. So it's about 3.5 minutes. I'll make sure the sound's on. And you can just sort of breathe and pull out of the momentum and just sort of connect into this space as we listen together.
But he really got in there. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, I consider myself a karma yogi. I was once watching a TV program on Hatha Yoga, and it said that karma yogi is achieving the goal through a skill. And I consider my skill playing guitar. Right. And I've gotten to a lot of high places with the use of hallucinogenic drugs and playing guitar. Yeah. And I'd like to know if it's the same place as the place you talk about, the inner.
Well, there are two issues you raised there. One is the playing the guitar as a method, and the other is hallucinogenic drugs as a method. And of course, combinations of methods are always possible and useful. Regarding the guitar, the more that you are tuning in to like the music of the universe and approximating it through your guitar, that is, you're listening inward to hear that sound, like that particular melody line or chords, and you're hearing it like from inward and playing it outward, you're tuning towards like the perfection of law, and you're just tuning yourself. You're constantly using your guitar playing to tuning yourself, and then your guitar playing allows other people to make that connection for themselves. So in that sense, it's exquisite karma yoga. The use of hallucinogens, the latest information I can report is that when I was in India in 1971, my guru, who's a very far out being, he's now left his body, which is just another far out step on his part. But he took 1,200 micrograms of LSD this time, as opposed to 900 the last time I'd been there.
Yeah, I read that in your book.
And again, nothing happened, although he put me on tremendously that he was flipping out and all kinds of stuff. But then at the end, nothing happened. And what he said to me was, he said, it's useful. He said, it allows you to come in and have the darshan of Christ, by which he was using him as an example of a conscious being or space. He says, you can only stay a couple of hours and then you got to leave again. He said,
oh no. Oh. I always love the technical difficulties. Let's see if it comes back.
This is where we all get to fill in the blanks.
Exactly. I think we got I think we got the gist of it, though. He just sort of goes on in that realm for a second. So I think we can go from there, yeah? Yeah, let's just do that. I'll pause it just so it doesn't come on.
It's the Maharaji beach ball spin. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. So I have a question to get us started, but maybe you want to jump off from that clip real quick, or if anything that came up for you.
Well, I don't think I've heard that bit about like if the music, sort of the source or the intention of where it's coming from. And that definitely got me thinking about the process of what it's like for any of us making music, singing, and how we can put our attention on the intention or the source, and how that changes our connection to all that is. It's an interesting idea that we get to like choose that attitude. That's what came up for me.
Nice. Radha, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, we just heard a bit of it, but what I heard the caller, sounds like it was a call-in radio show, one of those old Ram Dass ones, that he plays guitar and he practices hatha yoga and he does psychedelics. And Ram Dass is like, yeah, all of those can be a path.
Yeah. Yeah. And he talked about karma yoga too, and this
Karma yoga
idea of like tuning in to that source is an aspect of karma yoga. I think most of us here know what karma yoga is, but just in case, it's the yoga of action, the yoga of participation in a lot of ways. The yoga of service is some of the ways that it's described. So kind of backing up a second, I'm curious, Krishna, if you would talk about what inspired you originally to create music with Ram Dass. I'm curious if you came in through like the spiritual teacher side or the psychedelic explorer side.
All of the above. I remember listening to, like, I was getting really hungry for, I feel like anytime a dog is on screen, it just upstages you. So I'm
totally. Everyone knows my cat.
I'm not listening to what you're saying. I was listening to a lot of talks in around 2008, and I was getting really hungry, and that was a really good way for me to ingest material like Terence McKenna. And there were fewer Ram Dass talks out there that were like really easily accessible, like on YouTube and stuff. But there were some. And I just remember he was just a real inspiration and teacher from afar. It was that mixture of the intellectual, the Harvard professor, the psychedelic, the spiritual, and his self-deprecating way of just making it feel so approachable, that he was just someone I dreamed of meeting, or I didn't have any real plan there. And I think Radha and I, when we met, had talked about things like this. And it's how these things work. Like there is no plan. There's just sort of the hope in your heart, but not even maybe thinking that would ever happen. And I mean, we've told different versions of this story in different ways. I'll just kind of skip to the end to say that when I was sitting there with Ram Dass and up in his study, and we were just in Maui, actually, in Hanuman, Maui, together, Radha and I, for the Maui Film Festival to premiere Music for Mushrooms. And we were staying at the house with Dasima, and I was remembering that moment so clearly when she shut that door in his study and the two of us were sitting there together. And then it really hit me. Because I think up until that moment, I thought I was so focused on navigating Raghu, and I just met him and all the things. What microphone do I need to bring? And then finally it's like, oh my God, like I'm sitting here with Ram Dass. It's like, this is happening. There's no one else in this room. This is a rare moment. I've jokingly described it as the spiritual White House. And I kind of thought the yogi Secret Service was going to, pot a beret through the door or something and be like, "You're not a real yogi." And of course, I saw a picture of Maharaji over his shoulder, which I just reconnected with a few weeks ago, where it's a very joyful picture of Maharaji. And it made things kind of melt and expand for me in a way where I realized that we're all under the blanket. Like, I was like, wait a minute, you're telling me Maharaji knows who I am? I just read about this guy, or I hear a talk. I was like, that blew my mind. And then I look back at Ram Dass, and he's giving me that's it. This is it. This is what it always is. It's always been this. And I just fall into it. So I guess it's a long way of saying I was inspired, but Maharaji just in ways that still amaze me, or the universe, all that is, brought us to this, and here we are today. And we continue to just all be in this great conversation around the fire, where there is no answer. There's just stories. There's songs. There's love, and it still feels I'll say for Radha and I, very alive, even to this day, very alive. And I can feel it in this moment, and we feel it through the satsang, through the others, and even this conversation today is a way for myself just to cultivate that feeling in this moment by just remembering and speaking to it.
Yeah, yeah. Krishna Das talks about bhakti being sharing stories, and often will be in these satsangs. We've been doing these in variations for 4 years now. 4.5. And people often just say like, oh yeah, I feel it. I feel it when I'm here. So yeah, thank you. So our topic tonight specifically is around psychedelics and music. And it sort of can go two ways, right? Like how music affects the non-ordinary state. But as a creator of music, how these non-ordinary states sort of impact the creation process of music. And so I'm curious if you want to jump into one or the other of those in some way.
The creation process of music?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, what just came to my mind right now is a slight pivot, but it's not, is not a yoga. And I'm hoping Radha can kind of shoot me off in that direction, because I feel like there's something connected there.
Yeah, great.
Well, nada yoga is the yoga of sound, the yoga of vibration, the word nada yoga. And I mean, gosh, that's so huge too. It is, as we know, it's all sound and vibration, and that it's like this gorgeous, intimate dance between the sound and the one who's making the sound, or the listener of the sound. It feels very co-creative in that dance space. And I'm not an artist in any way, shape, or form. Like East Forest is, I'm just a bhakti yogi. Like I learn chords and kirtan and chants, and I do what is prescribed to me. And so I'd imagine with someone like Krishna that interplay is even more magical. What would you say, Krishna?
Honestly, it's kind of a mystery, and I try not to overthink it, because I think like all music, all arts, really all creation is this kind of dance where spirit is singing through us, right? We're all the same vessel. We're all the same reflection. We were just talking about this yesterday, and with Robin about, sometimes people project things on you. I saw this with Ram Dass. I did it with Ram Dass. Like you project like, Ram Dass, he's my guru, and like, or whatever it is, but actually it's like we're seeing what is and what we are too, but they're emanating, it's coming through them in such a way that we're really hungry for that. But I think we sometimes forget like the same thing is through all of us. It's all that is. And in that way, we can be proud of our discipline to show up and put our pen to paper to free write, or to make images, or to make music, or whatever it is. But what comes through, I mean, gosh, I don't, I can't say, I mean, that's why it's so beautiful, is because it's the mystery itself, dancing in this infinite song. And in that way, it's just crazy, because like we take it for granted. Like music is just everywhere. And yet I was just talking about with someone an hour ago that if you think about how psychedelic ceremonies across human history, almost all of them, all that I know, were guided by songs and music. I mean, think about that. The same thing is used in the background of stores, birthday parties, weddings, just when we're working out, music's everywhere. But it's the one thing that guides a ceremony typically, or the main element. It could have been dancing. It could have been you always walk. It could have been you always do these exercise. No, it's music. And it's showing us the power and potential of how it's deeply connected to non-dual, to the mystery itself. It's a kind of bridge. And in that way, and we all sense this, like that's how we're using it to cultivate emotional states, to feel more happy, to feel more sad, to go to sleep. And we're using it to kind of create a bridge into the ethereal. And in that way, that's all I'm really interested in personally, is like, I just want to feel those feelings. And I just found that music is such a powerful way. Like you play with certain chords and it's like, I'm starting to feel a certain thing and I just want to feel more of it.
Two things came up when you were talking. And one, I typically don't share about my own personal experiences in non-ordinary states, but one of them just flashed in my head, and it was this moment of, I'm not a musician, but it was like a singing bowl. And in that non-ordinary state, it was just this incredible play of the universe. And I got to play with the sound of like this thing that exists so beyond me, and like how it came down into just a little bit more of form, but still very much vibrational. So that was one thing that came up. And the other thing that came up was this idea of, the brain and brain wave states, and binaural beats, and how music not only like is the emotional state, but also can really influence like the brain state, and how that can start to amplify non-ordinary states. Is that something you find or play with, or that's sort of the nada yoga part of it as well, in a small way? Curious how that lands.
What I'm thinking of, Jackie, as you say that, and what Christian was talking to, that was coming to me, is that you just said a moment ago, like, I'm not a musician, right? Like that, even in and of itself, seems so false. For myself, I have that belief. But for all of us, it feels like something that was taken away. I'm not a musician, almost like this idea of I'm not spiritual, or I'm not soul, or I'm not source. Also, like you could swap out those words. And I bet if we go back in human history, there wasn't even a word for musician. It was just like what we all did as humans together. But now it's become something different that we are or aren't, that we relegate to a certain subsect of the population. But I would say we all are musicians, and part of our awakening takes us back to that. I know that's been deeply part of my own awakening, and it rubs against an inner edge that's hard at times.
I love that. It's like a birthright. Like we would have known how to work with herbs, and now people are losing the ability to cook. But like it was our birthright. But in our Western mentality, somehow it became like the performer up there, and I'm not that. And that's such a great point. I love that.
Yeah, recorded music, let's say 120 years ago, whatever, when we started paying people to sing for us, it was transformative. It's a necessary in some way. I'm sure it's all part of this grand human ascent to whatever it is, this concrescence we're going towards. But it was a change. And it is about reclaiming. It is a birthright. I mean, we all have this voice box that singing's not that far off from speaking. Like we're using vibrations and tones to communicate. And singing is just an elongated form of that somehow just is a little richer and more, it's another flourish of creativity. And I've also been really feeling in my heart that this concrescence, this thing that we're speeding towards, we can look at graphs of progress, the economy, climate change, it's like AI, like it's all on this, like what is going on, this exponential curve towards something, singularity, as some people call it. I almost feel like it's a creative transition. The solution, part of the solution we need is a creative answer. It's something about artistry and the human spirit and reclaiming that as a technology in essence that makes it deeply human. And about moving forward as a people requires that in a sense. In other words, we almost need like more art and more songs. And just looking at psychedelic therapy, for instance, like if that's a big piece of psychedelic therapy, and we've kind of been ignoring it a bit in the last decade since we've had modern psychedelics, it's like, what if that will help us be a certain gateway to unlock part of the full potential of this experience? So anyway, it's to say that music and creativity feels like a part of our future in a needed way.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit? That seems like that's a good segue into the music for mushrooms. Maybe tell us a little bit about what inspired that, what it's about, how that fits into this conversation.
Well, we're out in it, and has been part of this filming for 3 years, everything. And I wanted to bring into the conversation around psychedelics, the aspect of music, because I always saw that psychedelic experience throughout history as the drug itself, essentially the set and setting you're in, like the place or how you're doing it, and the music, like a triangle. And this third piece, at least in a modern context, isn't talked about that much. And I wanted to bring that into the conversation. Why? Because I believe that the derivation of a lot of what we're experiencing at its core, to me, feels like a spiritual emergency. And in that way, like the ecological crisis is essentially a spiritual emergency of us not recognizing our connection to the earth, or pick your crises. And in that way, it's like Ram Dass says, the real work is in the privacy of your own heart. And in that sense, it's from the inside out that this change has to happen. Therefore, inner work is needed. And we need all the tools we can get right now. So that's not to say that psychedelic therapies are for everyone or that's the answer, but it's just it's a toolkit, it's a tool belt. So I just wanted to kind of help maybe play a little part to advance that message and that story. But I'm sure Radha has her own perspective on creating this film for the last several years.
Yeah, I mean, part of it for you is autobiographical. It's about East Forest and how he came to be East Forest. And that was starting, he had music projects prior to that and creative projects prior to East Forest. But East Forest was music that 15 years ago was made to guide mushroom ceremonies. And that was done in small, intimate groups for a number of years. And then he started to record it and put it out into the world as albums, like Prana or Music to be Born to or Music to Die to or Crystal Starship or all those early East Forests. But they were actually mushroom ceremony albums that were condensed and then put out. And the yoga world and the spiritual worlds and the meditation world, we liked them because it worked well in our setting too. And then he became known as like a yoga-ish guy, but he actually...
But I don't know much about yoga. Yeah.
Nothing about yoga
I just
at all.
Yeah.
And then was like riding this edge of like becoming public with his work, but it was always rooted in mushroom ceremonies, actually. But, almost 20 years ago, it wasn't the landscape that we have today. And so about 2018, he said to me, I want to do a ceremony concert where it blends a concert performance and the ceremony space. And it's like a hybrid musical experience. And so he's been doing that. And so the film Music for Mushrooms is kind of a journey of that evolution from the underground above ground, but then really beautifully weaves in personal narratives of folks who have been in ceremony with us over the years, from we're guiding a small group setting of a psilocybin ceremony with East Forest music, he's playing live, to groups that we're working with that aren't using any psychedelics at all, and they're totally sober. And how does a East Forest music in the ceremony concert setting affect them? We look at that. And then into this hybrid space of what we did a couple of years ago, and have been doing for a number of years, is we're holding the space, but it's people are opting in a responsible way. And it's like those who know that they could enter into the space in the concert that way with perhaps psychedelics, they do, and we're holding that container, or they're not and they're totally sober and they're also having deep experiences. So it's like the power of music for introspection, with or without the enhancement of psychedelics. Like Ram Dass has a great podcast on psychedelics where he talks about psychedelics as an amplifier. And you think about the music movement of the 60s and 70s and like how like psych rock that genre was and why that's so good. When you're on something that helps you to focus, really it's a focuser. You're like narrowing in on and then expanding through that focus, and why that's so pleasurable, that entrainment of the brain or the trance state that it can create that's beyond our normal reality, where we're kind of like bopping all over all the time. Like you can latch on to music under the use of a substance and it can take you to the most soulful places, like myself, I've personally ever experienced have been with something that's enhancing my consciousness and listening to music and like really giving myself over to the music. There's nothing like it. And you don't need psychedelics to do that, but boy, can it amplify in a powerful way.
Yeah.
So the film is about those edges and exploring those edges in our modern climate where it's not necessarily legal to do that yet. But throughout, somebody said to me after one of the showings, the screenings in New York City, the guy said something like, "Oh, it's great to see this is coming back around." And I was like, I don't think it's ever actually gone anywhere.
And Ram Dass is in the film a lot, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Ram Dass has a great piece in the middle where we weave in his history as like the Western, I don't know, we call him like the psychedelic grandfather in a way now, spiritual psychedelic grandfather, what he did for us back in the 60s and 70s and through Be Here Now, which I think probably everybody here in this satsang has read and has been impacted by. It was so powerful. So paying homage to the role that he played as an entity, but then also in our lives as well. And collectively. I mean, we're all here because of Ram Dass and Maharaji and Hanuman.
Right.
Can I add in a piece on Ram Dass? You know, he said when we were recording the album, Ram Dass album, on that song Home, he's basically like, psilocybin started my spiritual path. I mean, come on, think about that. Like, mushrooms started Ram Dass. His words, like, that's awesome.
There's
like,
a lot,
like,
right?
Thank you, mushrooms.
Really,
thank you, mushrooms.
Yeah.
For,
thank you, mushrooms.
helping Ram Dass be like, yo, I'm going this way. You know, like, that's profound. So, and I always thought it was LSD, and then he told me that, and it was, you know, Tim Leary and I think Allen Ginsberg or something in some house, and they took synthetic psilocybin. It was still psilocybin, and began his spiritual path.
I mean, thank you, because the way that you said that brings a poignancy to it. That's like, oh, right. Well, you were talking about the psych rock and this idea that, you know, psychedelics changed our music and music changes our psychology. I think about, you know, ketamine's legal. In a lot of the ketamine journeys people have, the music is so key for what the experience is. And you were talking about this a little bit, Radha. And so, you know, as you're putting together these ceremonies, you know, I'm curious for our satsang, for the people here, what do you, I don't even know how to quite ask the question, like, how do you put that together is sort of the way to do it. But of course, it's like asking the caterpillar how it's dancing. Do you know that story? Like, it's got 600 legs, which leg goes down first? You can't think about it that much, but maybe there's something you can share about that.
I think in the live space with ceremonies, it's improvisation is the doorway to almost like the most spirit coming through, because you're releasing a plan or the intellect, or like, it needs to be this way, as opposed to it's the way it is in this moment based on what's happening in the room. And I just think that is scary, but also exhilarating. And it's like surfing. There are times where you're on these waves and you're like, how the hell did we get on this wave? Like, and then sometimes that wave crashes and you're like, oh man, will there be another wave? And you just keep swimming around, and eventually things come. And that's grace, you know. But actually, I want to go to your original question about ketamine clinics and music, because Radha is a ketamine therapist. A lot of them aren't thinking about music, actually. Yeah. And I want to ask you, Radha, what your experience has been without music, when people bring in their own music versus, you know what I mean? Like, what's working, and why isn't it maybe a bigger consideration? Because it seems obvious to me, like, it will make their sessions better, which makes their business better, which is like, then use the best thing you can, but they often don't even think about it.
Yeah, it depends.
Well, I think they're thinking about it, but not everybody, I don't want this to sound bad, but not everybody has good musical taste. Like they don't know where to begin.
Or a good way to play it even, right?
Or the sound system, what you're hearing it on matters. And like folks that bring in their own music, I have had a few clients over the years that have been like really specific. I want to listen to this. And sometimes that can relate to their element of control, right? They're not able to surrender into something that they don't already know ahead of time. So that's can be a therapeutic element too, if they're willing to not have it just be their music. There's something to it being unknown, right? That you can kind of give yourself into the flow of it if you don't know the songs by heart. And then of course you have to be careful too if it is a known song, even if it's a song that like I know and I love, that's a popular song and is really emotional for me in a beautiful way, it could be triggering to somebody else, that particular song, because of their history and their upbringing. So you kind of have to be careful too using popular songs, because we do have so much history and memory tied to it that we don't know what that is for an individual. So what works so well with your music in that space is often it's new to someone. They don't know where it's going. It takes them on this journey. And I know that for you, when you're making it, particularly when it's a full album, like song to song as you've crafted it, there's a journey of tension and release. There's some elements of space and quiet, of like rest and reprieve before it takes you again. So it's not just like something that's coming at you the whole time. And it's curated in a way that's so artful and intentional from start to finish by one musical voice that can feel really cohesive, versus a playlist. And I've used playlists in different settings and situations before. And when that happens, each time a song comes on, it's a new musical voice and a new musical landscape, which can sometimes be interesting and kind of fun. Like it's like taking you again somewhere you didn't expect, but it also requires like a reorientation every time, whether that's conscious or unconscious. It's like, oh, where are we going now? Who's this? Oh, and then it's, oh, okay, now we're going over here and it's this. Which again, that's a variety. It's like a flavor of ice cream. You can do it that way. But I prefer East Forest, where I know the kind of
biased.
like, I'm
hearing you say it's
but
important that I'm not too popular. And
but this is a really, really important point. I think it resonates. Anyone who's worked with ketamine or anything, I think that voice, that coherent voice, really does make a difference. I also work with a clinic. I do a lot around integration. I want to talk about that in a second. And we're trying to make it accessible and affordable. And so we work in a group model. We're experimenting with group models. This was the Pearl Psychedelic Institute, and they were one of the 3 extended access MDMA clinics for the FDA experiments. But they work also with ketamine. And what they use are the silent disco headphones, so that everyone in the group is in the same music. And occasionally someone will insist on doing their own music. And they often have such a divergent experience from the rest of the group. It's like we were like, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But there is that real, like, every time the music changes, it's like a new journey begins in some way when it's a different voice. And so I really love that you brought that up. It feels that cohesion feels like an important point. And one of the things that people often do with integration is they'll say, listen to the playlist. And so I'm curious if you want to talk about that in your experience, the integration piece, and maybe how music or creativity comes into that piece.
Well, what you said is, that's one major advantage of having a bespoke piece, is that you can listen to it later and see what kind of feelings, and you could maybe do some practices with it, like journaling or creative practices. That's a way of sort of letting your deeper layers of your consciousness and soul speak through, as opposed to just talking it out. But largely speaking, like the fact that Radha is doing therapy with ketamine, it sounds like you are too, Jackie. From what I understand, it's somewhat rare. I've had a few experiences in other clinics where they really are focused on the medicine, which is fine, but there's no one to help me. And I think it's so critical because you're so vulnerable. and tender. And there's such an opportunity there to navigate and plant new seeds, whether through the integration or the experience itself. And I know, Radha, you've said you've seen this over and over and over again, the kind of essentially trauma work, largely, that people are doing that's so helpful to have the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking too of the times that I use Ram Dass, and like there's like every now and then I'm like, oh, I've got a song for you. Like a woman last week.
I'm going to blow your mind. Like, heart explosion coming.
In our prep, she was talking about her connection to nature and how she's a part of nature. And then in her journey, she started to talk about nature and how that's a place of safety for her. And then I played Ram Dass's Nature in it, like wove it into the Spores Collective. And she was just like, oh my God. And then I sent her Nature as a follow-up, like, and here, listen to this song again. Yeah.
Yeah. And, there is that, the neuroplasticity, depending on who you talk to, like 2 to 4 or longer weeks, like we have so much more availability because of the opening in our neuroplasticity. So it's like the fact that we're not really utilizing those 2 to 4 to 6 weeks afterwards just seems like, and more than just like talk therapy, like 2 talk therapy sessions, like to do the creativity pieces and the diving into the symbolism and the pieces that the messages that came up, and how do we bring that back into our life? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we are planting seeds, right? Whether it's unconscious or conscious. We're doing that every day, but imagine like that space.
The planting seeds, like I can't remember where I saw this a while back, but the delta brainwave states that you're in a ketamine journey, which we could then maybe translate to other psychedelics, is also the same that you're in the yoga nidra state, which is where you use and plant intentions. It's all about intention planting because of the brainwave state that you're in. And I use intentions a lot with the folks that I work with in ketamine therapy. I want to know what their intention is going into it. And then through the session, I help them weave that into their subconscious.
And that brings up a really good point of we're not going to be on these medicines all the time. And so what do we do after? There's one of my all-time favorite books is Aldous Huxley's Island, which is his one fictional piece. And they talk about moksha medicine. And like moksha medicine is like a feast. Someone else makes it for you. You have it on rare occasions. But the rest of the time you meditate. It's like you cook dinner for yourself. And I think of like yoga nidra and these practices that listening to the music, these things that open up and sort of tether us to those spaces that we might more easily connect to in the psychedelic space. But then we have to learn how to also and I think that's what Ram Dass did so much of in the next 40 years after the psilocybin sort of got him on his journey. He then used all of these technologies and practices to sort of tether back to those things he glimpsed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's not about being on psychedelics all the time. It's about being human.
The curriculum. Yeah.
Take the curriculum.
That's my favorite one. Yeah.
Sometimes we just need a little help, with our healing process. And that's why we come to all of these practices is meditation, yoga, nature, psychedelics, as we're looking for healing psychologically, physically, emotionally, spiritually. One of those or all of them, we're all just seeking healing of some form or the other. And I think if you just begin one of them, it opens you up to all the others, and they support each other so well.
Yeah. So I'm just noticing our time, and I want to open it up to our audience. I'm sure many of you have things that you'd like to share, ask. And because there's many of us, I'm going to ask that we keep our questions succinct. And you can write them in the chat, and I'll ask them, or you can raise your virtual hand. You go down to reactions in the little bottom of your screen, and then there's a raise hand. Are you all, does that sound good to you to go to questions? Yeah. Okay. Amy, you jumped right in, so go ahead.
I did. Hi there. So great to have you guys tonight. I'm fairly new to your music, but it's had a huge impact on me in recent times. And my last journey that I did on my own, I had your soundtrack, the Mushrooms, Music for Mushrooms soundtrack. And it's interesting, I typically have a playlist that I put together, and this was the first time I just had like one person's music. And interesting, I had a moment of a panic of kind of like going into my journey where I felt like it was like you and me. And I was like, well, wait a minute, like, I don't know if I want to be with him this whole time.
I feel you. Yeah, I feel the same way. No.
But I didn't expect that because, your music has been so great for me. I just thought, oh, this is great. He has a whole album just about this. But as I started going into the journey, I got a little nervous that I was going to feel like claustrophobic or feel like, kind of tied to this one place. And it passed and it moved. And it was with me through the whole journey, which was great. But I just wanted to first say thank you, because I really do find your music super unique, and it's had a huge impact both in and outside of journeying. But I just wanted to mention, addressing what you guys were both talking about everybody having access to music. That really came through in one of my recent journeys, where it was just so clear to me that everybody can sing. I'm a professional singer, and so I've spent a lot of time on stage, and it came clear to me like that there is that whole separation you guys said of like somebody being up on stage versus somebody not being on stage. And just really that we have the sound like in our bodies. Like my journeys are very somatic, and they're all spine stuff. And it's like with the spine, all the sound is coming out. And I don't know, it just became so clear to me that every single human being like needs to be singing, that it wasn't even like, oh, everyone should, or you shouldn't feel like you're not a musician. It was more like, no, we need to be doing this. This is like a part of like daily. We need to be moving this sound, like sound and movement. And at one point I was saying to the universe, like, what is your sound? Like, what I want to sing it. Like, it was like I had this sense that there was some particular sound that was like that we could find and we could articulate somehow.
Very Terrence McKenna of you. Yes.
So I'm curious about your experience with the universe and sound. And I know you go a lot of different places, but have you found, is there somewhere you go that you kind of feel like is this sweet spot that, I don't know, feels kind of it's zeroing in or tuning into something?
Yeah. Well, thank you for trusting the music. I'll just keep it brief and say that if it's coming from the heart, that's all that matters. And kind of like Ram Dass was saying in that clip, like, where is it sourcing from? And that's it. What comes out, how beautiful, technically advanced, all that's sort of just colors you put on top of it, but that's what matters. So for all of us, when we're singing, start by, if you're sort of new or you're afraid, start by doing it alone in the shower and just really just make tones and sounds or hum and just feel how it feels good, and be playful, because it is a playful act.
Fabulous. I love that. And this is a little bit of an aside, but it was something you said, Amy, about the universe sound. There's some like Taoist, they have these images of different like scales from the Taoist tradition that's supposed to be like the songs of the cosmos. So maybe go down that rabbit hole and see what you find. Kyle, go ahead.
Hey guys, Krisha, thank you so much for being here. This is truly amazing. So, I've kind of found during these experiences that, music really is kind of a vehicle to really blend into the fabric of the universe. You can kind of just like let yourself go and kind of shift into that ego dissolution state. But Radha actually mentioned that, shifting music can be disorienting. And, for me, like when I'm putting together a playlist, I put a lot of time into, the order of the songs, what should hit and when. And, but you're also doing it sober, right? You're not doing it during an experience. And so when you get into that experience, it can be extremely disorienting. You're just like, okay, I don't know if I want to go here right now, that kind of thing. So first off, I really do want to thank you. It's amazing to have just like one human being work on this experience, the way that you do for all of us. I think that's a really incredible thing. But kind of along the Terence McKenna line, I was wondering what your thoughts were on the method of like the Terence McKenna method, right? Like 5 grams in silent darkness. If that's something that you've ever kind of journeyed on, that kind of method, as a musical artist, if that's something that you've done, how was that for you? What are some takeaways? Again, if that's ever been something that you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I have experimented with the different methods over the years, but I, for myself, have settled on that's not typically the best path for everyone. Look, he had he was a trickster, and that worked for him. And I don't think that's necessary. We have this economy of scale in our society that more is more. And that's somehow better all the time. Or like, I did 30 grams. And it's like, okay. It's like all the roads lead to Rome. And I can tell you for science, many of the studies have found that there is a sweet spot. Now, I'm not giving dosage recommendations, nor am I saying that everyone's the same, because they are not. But they found in these studies, at least, that there's a middle medium ground dose that seem to have sort of the best effects for people of positivity, but they also have the sort of benefits of the journey. So everybody's different, and you do what you do. And but Terence also said, beware the underdose, and which is just a way of saying this kind of idea of all of us on the fringes are diddling around like the microdosing. And I'm not saying good or bad, but it's sort of like, if you want to shake the hand or walk through the doorway in any practice, at some point that might be interesting. But for myself, I'd say it comes in all shapes and sizes. And I'm at a point now in my life that, I can have the smallest amount and I feel so open that I'm just like, it can only be in a ceremonial setting because it just opens me up so much. I feel these things transcend time, they transcend space. It's not about necessarily even the logic of like you take this amount and this happens. This is spirit that is available to us without any medicine. It's just here. It's just what we are too. It's what Maharaji is. It's the universe. These are my feelings about it. And it's available all the time. And I don't know if Radha has her own thoughts on that, but, or sort of people's different experiences, because it's all over the map.
Well, it's a question, Kyle, like how much should I take and what is the right dose for me? And every time I do a ketamine journey, I'm helping somebody figure out their dose. And part of it is a guessing game, but I feel like there's some science behind it too. But with the mushrooms in particular, they're going to do what they're going to do. Like you could think you're taking what's going to be a huge dose and it's super inactive. And then you could also take what you think might be a small dose and it's the most powerful experience of your life. And so it's hard for us to quantify in that way, the way the spirit is going to choose to interact with us in that moment. And then there's so much else that goes into it besides just the amount. The set and setting can affect things in such a great way too. And so I think questioning for yourself, like, what's my intention? Like, why am I going into this journey and what am I hoping to experience or learn about myself? And letting that guide you. And sometimes when I'm unsure about dose, I'll do something like as simple as a body muscle test. That can help me. Like I'm trying to take my mind out of it and I'm asking my body, is this the right amount for me? And getting my forms of yeses and nos and then trusting that. Because it is a bit of a guessing game.
Yes. Check with your doctor.
We're not here to give any
settings.
We're not here to give advice. We have legalities that we need to be aware of.
All the things, et cetera, FBI warning included.
Exactly. I'm going to ask one of the questions from the chat. It's similar, but just there's someone who's saying, hey, I'm a little concerned that music's going to influence me in a big way. And I sort of want to just tap into like my natural spirit and heart. Any thoughts on that?
I would say yes, it will influence your journey. And that's sort of the point. That's why I think it's so important and valuable to think about what that music is. And perhaps if you had a sitter with you or a guide, a facilitator, maybe you've pre-thought out, if there's a moment where you could create some space and silence, I'd like to experience that. And I think that's lovely. Follow these intuitions. Again, a sense of curiosity about how you might intuitively, what's right for you and what's not right for you, and to safely explore that space as you can. But I think the fact that music is influential is the point. And it most definitely is a beautiful, it can become the space itself. And I think it's magic. It's multidimensional.
Yeah. We've heard from folks too that have been on journeys and they weren't using music, or they were, going about and doing it in different ways. And then they were struggling and remembered, there's an album called Music for Mushrooms. Maybe that'll help. And they've put it on, and that's set them on like a clear, grounded, safe, lovely path. So you could also try it out without music and see how that is, and then try it with music and see how that goes. And if you're struggling,
the button you can press just in case.
Yeah. There's it's like the hand of God will come in and be like, all right, we got you now.
You're right though. It's a guide. And more than anything, it's something for our attention to follow, to participate in, and to actually cultivate the energy of the room-to-room experiences that we're in. Like it is sort of conjuring a sort of energetic field. We might call that emotion, but in an amplified psychedelic space, you become synesthetically these things, or you can. And so in that way, I mean, why wouldn't you have a guide? It's sort of saying, is there a tour guide around here in case I want to lean into it? And that's why having that be intentional is really important.
Great. Thank you. Will, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. This is so timely because right after this, I'm leading a sound bath on the beach at sunset. And I just love this, like, everything you said resonated, even the surfing analogy. That was so cool. And I guess my question is, how do what types of questions can you prompt people in a group setting to help them tap into their inner vibration and inner music? And like, because in the past I've encouraged people like, hey, if you want to like chant and om with me, or if somebody wants to play one of these sound bowls while I'm playing, like come up and grab it. I feel like people are like hesitant to like jump into it. And I'm wondering if maybe there are ways to like make like fertile soil so that people feel empowered to like tap into their inner musician, like in these ceremonies that you've found helpful.
I just invite them, like in the moment. I think when they're in that space, it's sort of like, Radha, do you ever play with that?
What comes up to me is like, imagine they're all kindergartners or preschoolers, and you're leading a preschool class, and it's like, let's all say the sound ah together. Let's all say the sound ooh together. Now we'll say the sound together. Now you've just said the sound of om. And so like real easy, like follow the leader kind of gateways. And when I'm leading a class, I'll say, you can say this with me or just listen, right? And so some people will listen for a while and some people will join you, but like, how can you make it really playful and accessible? So play easy, like that inner child's piece seems like for a lot of us, one, we need healing there. For a lot of us when we were younger, that's when we were told, stop making noise, be quiet, don't say that, go sit down. And so that invitation that Krishna said of like, no, it's safe here to like play and explore and be silly, just starting real basic, really super basic.
Good. I'm going to ask one of the questions from the chat, which is the importance of listening to music from one's culture maybe something you grew up with, and how that is or could be effective in one psychedelic journey versus, listening to things that we were talking about earlier, which you might not know, or is maybe from a different culture.
Yes. Yeah. We've heard of folks listening to music of their ancestral background and having spontaneous awakenings of being able to like dance to it or sing to it or even language. I've heard this. I think it's amazing. It's almost like an epigenetic knowledge through music that could be carried in our brains. So, why wouldn't you explore that? Holy cow. That just makes me think like, what can we do in that realm of research and exploration? So it kind of goes back to the first question we had about safety and what makes you feel good. That's the bottom line. That's basic set and setting. Like, if you feel safe with a particular music, I would say lean in that direction. And another reason why having perhaps someone experienced with you or a facility and so forth, they might be able to help with that process. Like, this thing we're bringing forward or this participation with music with you or myself giving you some live music, we think, we found that this works really well. We're like, things you don't know. And that can be wonderful to have that sense of discovery too. I think it's quite powerful, this sort of open space and landscape of that anything can happen in this that's emergent out of the experience itself, as opposed to something we've brought in from sort of 3D reality beforehand. And that's a real privilege and a gift to sort of have to be brought to you in that space. But it's so magical too.
Radha, do you want to add anything to that?
I just would say explore, try it out, certainly listen to music that's from your unique ancestral lineage. Absolutely. And see where that takes you. And then I'm thinking of a fellow, Leor, who's in the film Music for Mushrooms, who's a neuropsychologist, researcher, who for many years now, for the past long while, let's just say, has been doing work with ayahuasca and Palestinians and Israelis in healing work. And he talks specifically about the power of music in those where you have this long, intractable conflict towards the other, and then listening to the music of the other culture, just the music by itself, how that can help affect your sense of connection to this other. So even listening to music from other cultures and how that might land for you is worth exploring as well.
In that heart open space. Yeah.
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 That's powerful. Thanks for sharing that. Matthew, go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much. I wanted to ask a brief question about if you would talk about the recording process, especially the moment of inception, or maybe instruments that you use for inspiration when you're first sitting down to record something new.
Well, it's been pianos and keyboard instruments a lot, but I think it's important to shake it up. But I would go back to it's improvisation largely. So it's sort of like finding something, some instrument, some whatever it is, getting it set up, and then just try, almost like just improvising in the moments, like hitting record and just seeing what starts to come up. And maybe in 10 minutes, 30 minutes, the goal is like some kind of idea comes out. And sometimes that idea, and then you move on, and then I often do that, a couple ideas a day, and then just keep doing that for a while, for days and days and days, weeks and weeks, and then look back later. Because when you're looking back, it's a different mind. It's more of a editorial, curatorial mind. Where and you actually hear things differently. Many times I'll be sitting there playing, thinking, "Wow, this is simplistic." And you just do it. And then later on, you forget about it. And you're listening to it and you're thinking, man, that's got the bob, whatever that is. That's just, it feels so authentic. Like in some ways, the simplicity can be a doorway. So I would say improvisation. Yeah. And being open to that moment, even though you might have a thought or a plan, it's more like, well, I don't know. What's kind of, what, even the way something looks, like the keys, or, oh, I want to play minor right now, or like I just heard this bird outside. And I think it's all like this tapestry nudging you. It's like the universe giving us little ideas, and we can pick up on them, and it's just a big playful opening. But more than anything, I think there was some writer, I don't remember who it was, but they're like, how do you get inspiration to strike, or when does it strike? He's like, well, every 10 a.m. when I sit down to write. Like, the biggest thing is like, just show up. That's the hardest thing, and start doing something. As Beck always says, you're just making noise. Don't worry about what it is. You're just making noise.
Love that. So one of the other questions from the chat is, so someone's asking about a playlist with chanting or Krishna Das in the Chalisa, and it brings up this sort of bigger question of music with words versus music without words. I'm curious what your experiences have been with that.
Personally, bhakti, chanting, kirtan, all by itself, 100% sober, gets me into a psychedelic state, gets me into an altered trance state. Some of the deepest, most powerful experiences I've ever had have been with Dave Stringer or Bhagavan Das or Krishna Das. And so, yeah, you don't even need anything else. And I would imagine if you used that with an enhancement as well, it would be just as profound. It's incredible. All you have to do is chant, because it's a breath practice too. It is pranayama, and then it is the nada yoga, and it is the vibration. Sometimes with bhakti singers too, like I love in kirtan, where it's kind of like you have to pay attention, like it's not just one or two repetitive words. It's like I really have to focus. And it's that ability or that moment of like deep focus, dhyana, right? Concentration that takes you into the samadhi of it is, it's so good. It's so good. So just bhakti, just chants. Yes. Yeah. And try it on psychedelics or not, but it's certainly a pathway to explore.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, do you want to go ahead? Oh, there you are.
Unmute. Hi, I am a musician, a songwriter, and composer, and I guess it's both for Radha and East. Both of you can speak to this of how would or how do you go about, let's say, sitting down to compose or improvise as opposed to doing music, doing that as a practice, as yoga? What would the approach be?
I don't know if it's different. I mean, yeah. Radha?
The question, Jamie, will you say it again?
Well, maybe it isn't different, but how you would approach music as practice, as yoga, rather than just doing, not just, but is it different?
Showing up is my
yoga.
Showing up.
Then the regularity, that is the devotion. Like
Yeah, like that. Like again, like for me, I'm a bhakti, and I taught myself to play the harmonium. I've taught myself to chant. I've taught myself to be okay with my voice, to use it as my centering, grounding alignment to source that clarifies me, let's just say. And that's just sitting down to do it. Mm-hmm. And I love learning, right? And so for me, it's about learning how to do something and realizing our brains are capable, way more capable than we typically put them to the test too, especially in our modern day and age, right? Like even just memorizing the Hanuman Chalisa. At first you think like, well, there's no way I could ever do that. But if you think back in time, like was what we all did before the written word, was we just memorized these long verses and passed them down through each other. That's how we have our history, but we've really lost that. And so even just giving ourselves a practice of like, I'm going to learn the Chalisa, you can do that. You are capable of that. You have more potential than you realize, and just like exercise it and work it. That's the neuropsychology too of the brain. And then art in and of itself is a creative act that connects you to the unknown and the muse and source and inspiration and intuition, and you just let it take you. I'm not in a place where I create art. For me, it's about like the learning how to make it through myself, which has been so valuable to me. But I think all of it is wonderful. If that answers your question, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Thank you. Thank you. Gives me something to think about.
Krishna, do you have anything to add? Because someone else asked a similar question, and it sort of points back to that first clip we listened to where he's talking about playing guitar and letting it come through you. Just this, how do we go deeper within ourselves with this process of making art or music?
I don't know. I think there's such a big difference between performing a song or learning a song and playing it and just sort of riffing and making up sounds and music. And one is just infinite possibilities. And so it goes back to almost like singing in the shower. Like, you don't have to know how to make an instrument. It's just the idea that you're in open territory with sound makes you then the most available to receive source itself. Whereas perhaps it can be a little harder with the song you're learning until maybe there's a fluency, and then even then it's like an actor learning their lines and you have to forget them so that you can be in the scene. And therefore, if you're just making up a scene, you're making up music, there's an immediacy to it that brings us right into the present moment.
Yeah, I love that. It's like there's like two parts of it. And I remember when I was really nervous about learning how to play the harmonium, like I wanted to learn songs, and a person was like, just move up and down the scale and play with it. And then this idea of another thing that came up was Martin Prachtel. He's got several great books, and a school called Bollad's Kitchen. And one of the parts of the school is he plays like ancestral music, ancient music, and you're just supposed to listen. Is that played with a fingernail or a pick? Like to really hone our listening skills. And I almost feel like that's kind of a meditation that tunes us in a way that can maybe be helpful for someone who wants to do that. I'm not sure. Let's take this last question, and then we'll go into our breakout rooms. Sebastian, go ahead. Oops, can you unmute yourself? There you go.
Now it works. Thank you. The setting wasn't allowing it for a second.
Okay.
There's something that was just said, prompted me to just maybe say something as well. The question just came up with like music, if it is more instrumental or if there's also lyrics, right? I feel like for me, from my experience, it makes a very big difference. And I almost feel like, and it doesn't have to be the case for everyone, but that lyrics are a little bit detrimental because they pull your mind towards the lyrics themselves. Versus my experience with something like music for mushrooms or music for psychedelic therapy, where the ambient sounds, the music has that power of taking your ego, basically helping like this dissolvement of the ego. It almost feels like the music is taking you on that journey and taking you away. Versus lyrics might have that opposite effect, that just like dictate where you're actually going to bring you back into your mind. That's maybe also something that I have a quick question to Krishna. My interest is like your process when you create music like this. Do you also have a process of refining it by, for example, listening to it during your own psychedelic journey or asking friends about their experience? Like which parts of the music had a profound impact, which parts might be actually distracting, what types of instruments you might use that might deepen the impact, or during like let's say, a perceived peak of your journey, right? Like, is there anything in your process there where you go through it?
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's created, as we said, recorded in the ceremonial space, improvised live. So that's its thing. And that's not so much of a thought process. And then later on, there is this role of having to listen to it and make some decisions and curate and mix and master and edit at times. And that is a very different brain. And I don't want it to just be, I don't know, too rational. And so it is an important part of the process to test it, in essence. And I'll do that myself in different ways and also listen in different settings. I'll, at some point when I get closer to a finished piece, I'll send it to some friends and ask for their feedback in a very general sense, though, at this point, just kind of seeing if it's resonating. And then in Radha's ketamine clinic, I can beta test a lot of things with the general public and get some pretty good real-time feedback. Sometimes I'll go into the ketamine clinic, I'll join the group sessions and I'll journey with them and just feel it. But, you know, ketamine can be kind of mercurial in a sense. I've had journeys where so I take little notes, right? It's hard to take notes and I'll log the notes into a spreadsheet. And one time I was testing, trying to learn, okay, is this working or not? And this song came on and I remember thinking, oh man, this is just not working. Ugh. D-, I wrote something on the paper, exclude, for sure. And I get into the spreadsheet to log it in and there's the previous notes. And the previous note from many months before said A+, end the record with this song. This is the one. And you're just this is driving me crazy. I found that to be with ketamine. And I don't intentionally write music for ketamine therapy, but a lot of people have used a few of my records in that spaces. But with mushrooms, I feel a little more of an immediacy of conversation with the mushrooms and helping inform that and what's coming out. And so I have a much more of a fluency just from over the years of feeling what is the language and what wants to be coming out. And it's really not anymore a thought process. It's truly just a creative process that because of the feedback from anyone, I can start to trust more that okay, we're in service to this. It's just about now trying to get out of the way. And yeah, you pick up little tricks here and there, like lyrics, like you're talking about. A long time ago, I started to recognize that lyrics are very specific. They're in the language centers of our brain. So if there's going to be a lyric, it's very intentional and simple, and it's going to be powerful and sort of it's a jolt in a way. But that's a choice. That's so. But yes, we get feedback. Is to answer your question in different ways.
Wonderful. I love this conversation. It's so great to be having this. And so now we're going to go into the part of the program where you all get to have conversations with each other and share some of your experiences. So there's a couple of things I want to do, and I'm not sure which order to do them. One is to get you settled and into your groups. But I also want to make sure we take a moment and just thank Radha and Krishna for coming and being a part of this satsang, this Explorers Club, to share their knowledge and their wisdom. And I know we're also grateful for being able to be here with them tonight. So again, big round of our sign language applause. Thank you so, so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really an honor.
Yes, thank you for hosting, Jackie. This has been really sweet to connect in with everybody and to hear all your questions and to see all of you in your little windows. It's been just so special. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jackie. Yeah. Thanks, Radha.
Thank you.